So a few months before she and I met, she was 20 years old. And there she is, 20 years old. And I was much thinner then. It's actually not me, it's some other punk with his arm around my wife. But that's her at 20, and so just kind of get that image burned in your brain. She was working at that time for a startup company, and someone in her family had sort of connected her with this job, and the idea was she was hired to do a lot of clerical stuff, secretarial stuff, but very quickly the guys that were running this operation decided that they really liked her, and so they started putting her in charge of more and more, and within just a few months, she became like a mid-level manager in this company. So this was 1996. Again, she's 20 years old. And after just a few months in this place, okay, get your mind around this, she was making over $5,000 a month. Okay? And she was climbing. It just looked like it was going to keep going. But the company she was working for was a little bit odd. They were just kind of secretive about certain things, a lot of whispering kind of in the corners. And they were run by these young sort of anti-establishment guys, sort of granola. You know what I mean by granola? They're granola. You know, they're like free-spirited, sort of anti-government guys that said stuff like, whoa, far out, man. And so most of the people that worked there were kind of that way. They're sort of these countercultural people. In fact, one coworker came into Jen's office, which, how cool is that? At 20 years old, she had her own office. And this lady had a long flowing dress, kind of a tank toppy summer dress, pretty lady. And she leaned up against the door to talk to Jen. And all that Jen could focus on was the hair climbing out of her armpit. And it must have been like hot that day because it was like all sweaty and tangled. And so, okay, this is the kind of place where she worked. The culture, you know, sort of this new age, everybody's own natural. There was another lady that worked there, another very natural lady. And Jen was trying to make conversation with her. And this lady had very long, just beautiful, perfectly straight hair, like straight out of the 70s. And so Jen looked at her and she said, you know, your hair is so beautiful and it's so healthy. And the lady said, thanks. You want to know the secret? And Jen was like, okay. And so she said, well, first thing in the morning, I pee in a jar, and then I use it as conditioner after I get done shampooing. And she's like, and so this is why it's just so beautiful and so natural and so long and soft. And she says to Jen, do you want to feel it? So this is the culture. Very natural, anti-establishment. But Jen is getting paid well. And she's just kind of climbing. And there seemed to be like no ceiling on where this thing might go. I'm like, where might she be in a month or two or even a year or two? But still, she often kind of in the workplace felt this weird vibe. And most of the time, you know, people were nice, and so she just kind of dismissed it. And then one day they had a Christmas party, an office Christmas party. And they did it right there in the office. There were maybe 25 employees, pretty much everybody that worked there, okay, from top to bottom. No spouses were invited, no significant others, just the people in the office. And initially, Jen says it was a very normal Christmas party. People were standing around and they're drinking cider or they're drinking champagne or, you know, all that kind of stuff. And as it is about to wrap up, the founder calls everybody together. And they form a circle, and everyone's given a candle, and they turn the lights off. And the founder gives instructions for everyone to go around the circle and share something bright. Could be about the company, could be just about life in general. And Jen thought, okay, you know, this is a little different, but it's okay. That's all right. And so they went around and they did that. And when they finished, the founder of the company said, well, now I'm going to turn the rest of our time over to Sandy. Now, Sandy's not her real name, but Sandy is the pea hair lady. And apparently, sometimes upper management would go on these extended retreats, and Sandy would come and she would lead them in what they called spiritual exercises. Okay, Jen had never actually been a part of this or seen it, but she'd heard about it. So Sandy comes up, and she falls into this droning voice. And she starts calling on the spirits. And it's kind of like a prayer, and it's kind of like a seance, and it's a little bit like she's a witch casting a spell. And she's just chanting on and on and on and on, beckoning the spirits to come. So all the employees are standing around the circle with their candles, and Jen is looking around at everybody going, "This is crazy." Then Sandy calls the spirits. Everyone's faces are all lit up by the candles, and they seem like they're totally into it. I mean, Jen's like the only one with her eyes open. She's looking around, and everybody's got their eyes closed, and they're nodding, and Jen is like totally creeped out. So finally, Sandy gets to the apex of the whole thing, and she says, "Okay, on the count of 3, we're all going to blow out our candles. And we're going to let the God in each one of us enter the world." So she's like, 1, 2, 3. And everybody blows out their candle. It's total darkness. Except for Jen. With her candle. Lighting up her face. So everyone, like the founder and the pea-hair lady and all of the employees, they're all staring at Jen with her candle. And Jen's like, this is awkward. But I'm not going to blow this thing out. Because darn it, I am not going to let my inner God enter the world. And this whole thing goes against like everything that I believe. And so after several seconds of everyone staring at her, if you know Jen, she's like the most stubborn person. She's like, "I'm not blowing this thing out," but she was kind of tired of everyone looking at her. So she spits on her fingers like this, kind of looks at everybody, goes, "Psh," on the candle. So the next day, the founder calls her into his office, and he demanded to know why she wouldn't blow out her candle. And she explained that to her, it was inconsistent with following Jesus. And so he grabs her and he says, "Well, actually," and he starts quoting the Bible to her. Starts spewing verse after verse after verse, trying to convince her that this was all okay, that this was all right, that God would be in favor of this. And she couldn't believe it because she's like, "You know what, this guy actually knew the Bible really well." But she said, "You know what, sorry, I have to disagree. As much as you can quote scripture, I have to disagree. This does not honor Jesus." And she went on, she's like, "In fact, I'm so confused. You clearly know the Bible, and yet you don't follow Jesus." Like, she's like, "What's up?" And he said, "You know what? You're right. I'm absolutely not a Christian." And Jen said, "Well, I am, so I'm not going to do that stuff." And she said, "Please don't ever put me in that kind of a position again. Like, if you know you're going to break into a seance and people are going to be calling on the spirits, let me be excused." And her boss, who, she's so bold in this thing, her boss, who could have like fired her in an instant, looked at her and said, "You know what? I wish I could change your mind. I hate what you believe. I absolutely despise the Christian faith. But I love how strong you are. I love how you stand up for what you believe. And it's what makes you so valuable around here. And so don't ever change." A couple of months later, Jen came to work one day like normal, and the SWAT team was all over the office. There were like machine guns everywhere, and SWAT guys shouting, and they were confiscating computers, and some of the co-workers were in here. It was like a scene out of 24. People were being interrogated, and Jen's just all meek, like, "Oh, what's going on here?" And, I don't know, what kind of place is this? And then she just left. So she finds out later that the Federal Trade Commission had seized the corporation because apparently they had violated quite a few corporate laws. They were doing all sorts of illegal stuff. They were evading taxes and all kinds of junk. And so a few of the higher-ups were actually prosecuted and sent to prison. So Jen found a much lower-paying job. And then she met me. And it's been nothing but bliss ever since. But today I want to talk about the reality that we all face pressure. We face pressure to compromise what we believe. And it might not be as wild and crazy as a workplace Christmas party where a pea-hair lady is calling on the spirits. But we all face pressure to compromise. And today we come to this classic story in Daniel, this story that gets told in kids programs all over the world, all the time. And it's such a classic story. So, okay, here we go. This is Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 to 7. It says, King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, nations and peoples of every language, this is what you are commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and peoples of every language fell down and worshiped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is trying to create a society of captured peoples. People from all kinds of different nations, all kinds of languages, tongues, cultures, and so on. Okay, he's dealing with the challenges of what we would call in our culture multiculturalism. And Babylon was extremely diverse because of their foreign policy. Whenever they captured another nation, they didn't just obliterate it. They brought the brightest and the best and all the most beautiful people back to Babylon. And they wanted to integrate them into their own nation, into their own society. The idea was, we will become a nation of all-stars. So Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom is incredibly diverse. Different ideologies, different languages, different religions. And he decides that the nation needs unity, something that will hold them all together. And how better to create unity than to form a common religion? So he has this massive statue crafted. Now, what this statue looks like or what it stands for is left vague by the writer. We aren't really told, and I think it's deliberately vague. I mean, is it a statue of Nebuchadnezzar? Is it a Babylonian god? We aren't told, and it doesn't really matter, because this is not so much a story about religion as it is politics. It's about power. It's about national identity. It's about national unity. And we're told that the statue is magnificent. The writer tells us that it's 90 feet high. It's 90 feet high and made of gold. It's an object of immense value. It's very, very impressive. And for the dedication ceremony, he holds nothing back. He wants this to be a spine-tingling event that will catalyze the nation. Something that they will never, ever forget. So imagine this. The people are to make a pilgrimage out of the capital city, and out into the plains, out in Dura, where they will see the most impressive gathering of leaders ever assembled. Okay, leaders and peoples of vast nations and cultures. And that's why the writer has these long lists of leaders that just keep getting repeated. It's a little bit annoying when you're a pastor and you're trying to preach through the passage. All the prefects, governors, magistrates, satraps, and all the provincial officials. Okay, all these leaders and nations, the best of the best. And so you have to imagine, as everybody's kind of gathered and sitting around, you have to imagine maybe like the opening ceremony of an Olympics. Yeah. Like this vast assembly of people from various cultures, the best of the best, the brightest of the brightest, the most talented of the talented. Nothing like this had ever been seen or done. The art and the beauty and the pageantry of this whole event. And then you combine that with, say, like a presidential inauguration, where it's got the feel of this nationalistic rally. It's political, and it's patriotic, and it's immense. There's a sea of people as far as the eye can see. And then there's art and music. He assembles this massive orchestra. This would be like the concert of concerts, every instrument imaginable. And again, that's the point of these long lists of instruments being repeated throughout the story. The horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music. I mean, the idea is that the music alone would be transcendent for people. A few years ago, I went to see U2 at CenturyLink. Oh my goodness. Did anybody else go to that? Oh man, it was mind-blowing. It was like 80,000 people singing Where the Streets Have No Name together. It was unbelievable. And just with that, do you know that song, the intro that kind of kicks that song off, just builds and builds? It's like, whoo. And the Seattle skyline and the crowd is like unreal. Okay, so imagine like a Babylonian U2 concert. And you put all this stuff together, and this is what's being described in Daniel. And if all of that together was not enough to compel people to bow down, then Nebuchadnezzar decreed that failure to comply meant that you would be thrown into a fiery furnace and burned alive. So the music starts, and the people are highly motivated to bow down. Literally, in verse 7, the text says, as soon as they were hearing like the music, they were falling. It's like a race to see who's going to hit the ground first. And then through the crowd, there's a ripple of noise. It was quiet at first, but the buzz is starting to grow and grow and grow, and it's even drowning out the music. And finally, nobody's even looking at the statue anymore, because at the front of the assembly, 3 of the highest ranking officials in Babylon are still standing. The Jews that had been exiled from Israel are refusing to bend the knee. Okay, verses 8 to 12. At this time, some astrologers, and these would be like highly respected cabinet members of the government. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your Majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego." And if you were here 2 weeks ago, we talked about the story where Daniel interprets the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, and he's just blown away by it. And he's like, well, your God is the God of gods. And Daniel's like, that's right, now put my friends in charge of the country. And so that happened. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up. Now, because these Babylonian astrologers, these power-hungry bureaucrats, have been placed underneath Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Jews from Israel, they are consumed with jealousy. They can't stand it that these guys came from another country and now they're the top officials. And so this is their chance to bring them down. And they pounce on it. They go straight to Nebuchadnezzar. Verses 13 to 15. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. And Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Now, I just want to pause for a moment to consider this question. Nebuchadnezzar asks, what God will be able to deliver you from my hand? And this falls into the category of a rhetorical question. He's not looking for an answer. He's not expecting them to name a name. He's making a point. It's like a parent saying to a child, do you want a spanking? I mean, kids aren't supposed to think about it and go, well, I was thinking about playing Xbox, but now that you mentioned it, a spanking sounds pretty good. When Nebuchadnezzar asks, what God can deliver you from my hand? He's not looking for information. He's not looking for them to name a God. He's just pointing out what to him seems obvious. Okay, understand, friends. And he's given them a chance here. They've already not complied. And he's like, well, I said I would kill you, but let's give you another chance. Understand, friends. He's saying, you're in my hands. I have absolute authority over what will happen to you. I mean, what God can deliver you from my hand? But these guys don't treat it as a rhetorical question at all. Okay, look at verses 16 and 17. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. Now, again, we got to pause here, because this is a statement of remarkable faith. Our God is able to save us from the furnace. Our God is able to save us from the furnace. He's able to rescue us from any kind of danger. He's able to deliver us from even your hand, O king. Our God is able. And I don't think it's possible for people who follow God to spend too much time reflecting on that one truth. The God that you and I serve, the God who has convened us together in this room, our God is able. Our God is able to save us. Our God is able to rescue us. Our God is active. Our God is powerful. Our God is able. In 2001, something happened that really changed the course of my life. Jen and I were hanging out one day, and I had decided to go to the doctor and get a mole removed from my face. And it's awkward to say right here in church, but I just said it. I had a mole, and I didn't like it, and it was in the way of shaving and all kinds of other things. So I decided I'm going in and getting rid of that baby. So one night, we're heading to bed, and Jen's just kind of scratching my back, and all of a sudden she says, babe, I'm concerned. You have another mole on your back, and I don't like the way it looks. It looks scary. And so when you go to the doctor and you get this one removed, would you please have him look at the one on your back? And I was like, what do you mean it looks scary? What do you mean it looks suspicious? What do you know about moles? She says, well, it doesn't have clear boundaries, and it's like multicolored, and I'm just like, when did you become a mole expert? She's like, well, I just read an article about it last week, and so here it is. So would you please ask the doctor about it when you go in? I was like, yeah, okay. But in the back of my mind, I was like, no, I'm not going to ask him to look at no. So I go in there, and we do the procedure, and we're getting done, and he says, is there anything else? And I'm like, no. I mean, I don't want to ask him to look at come on. It's embarrassing. It's weird. But then I was like, I'm going to go home, and Jen's going to look me right in the eye and go, did you ask him? I'm going to have to go, I'm either have to lie or I have to go, no, I didn't ask him. So I said, okay, well, this is kind of weird, but my wife is concerned about this mole, and if you could just look at it. So he's like, okay. So he takes a look at it, and he goes, oh yeah. So he says, we got to biopsy that. And so biopsied it right there. And I went home, and everything seemed normal. So it's the middle of summer, and about 2 weeks after that, I get a call from the doctor, and he sounds like death. And he says, hey, I have to tell you, we biopsied that abnormality, and it turns out that it's malignant, and that it is melanoma. And so you're going to need to come back in. We need to schedule you with a thoracic surgeon, and we need to have a good chunk of your back removed. And he said, but here's the good news, in like the most depressing voice I've ever heard over the phone. There's a 95% chance that you will be able to live at least five more years. And I was like, what is happening right now? And so I ended up going in, and they ended up removing a huge chunk all around. They had a mole this big, and they got to remove an area like that big to make sure that they get it all. And they got it. And again, this was 2001, and I have exceeded the 5-year, 95% prognostication. But when I think about that, I go, that was really an extraordinary thing that all went down. We've got a picture of our family at right around that time, and here we are. Little Bubba on my wife's lap, her short hair. Kate with them teeth. Had I not gone in and seen that doctor, I probably would have lived maybe another year after this. I mean, it would have been over fast. And when I think about all that went into that, the fact that Jen read an article the week earlier, the fact that we were sitting there at night and the light was on enough for her to see the thing, and then she had enough sense to bring it up, and the fact that I just happened to be going in to have a procedure done, and then I would have left had the doctor not brought it up. But he said, is there anything else? And this feeling in me said, I need to say something about this. And I look at that and I go, that's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, there would have been no Brooklyn. There would have been no Brookview. I would have been gone years ago, and I wouldn't have known any of you. And God was up to something. Because God is able. And here's the thing, okay? Here's what we could do. We could go around this room, and we could spend the rest of the morning, just like one by one, telling stories from our lives that reflect this one truth. God is able, and he's been active in our lives, and he's been up to stuff. I mean, I know crazy things have happened in your guys' lives that God has done. It's unbelievable. He is able. The God we serve is able to reconcile broken marriages, and he's done that for marriages in this room. The God we serve is able to liberate people from addiction, okay, and he's done that for people in this very room. The God we serve is able to heal damaged bodies. He's able to bring children to families and couples that are barren. He's able to connect single people to their one true love. And the truth is, we could go around this room like for hours just telling stories of the great things that God has done. God's activity in our lives. The reality is this isn't just like theory. It's not just words on a page somewhere. You've seen it. The God we serve is able to provide for the greatest need. He's able to guide with supernatural wisdom. He's able to inspire spiritual gifting far beyond human ability. He's able to soften the hardest hearts. And for some of you, you've seen that happen in you. Other people you love. He's able to bring the farthest prodigal rebel back home. And so, I don't know what challenge you might be facing these days, but I don't think that we can cling too tightly to this one truth. Our God is able. Now, these three guys, they find themselves in a serious predicament. A king with absolute authority says, what God can save you from my hand? And in an extraordinary declaration of faith, they say, the God we serve is able. But they don't stop there. I want to look at a second statement of devotion that they make that is so extraordinary and ends up being the thing that will define their lives. I mean, you think about this moment that led up to all that's happening. I mean, these are three young Hebrew men who were captured in their own country. Their nation is destroyed. People that they love are executed. And they are transported to a foreign country with a foreign culture, foreign language. And even through the devastation and all that happened to them, they give their lives to God. They continue serving him faithfully, like even in Babylon, where they don't want to be. Even though their lives have come crumbling apart, then in Babylon, amazing things happen. And God moves, and they're promoted to very high government positions. And then one day, they hear about the king's edict, that all the people are going to eventually need to bow down to this statue of gold. So they meet together as a little community, and they pray, and they decide together that it would be unthinkable to bend the knee. It would be unthinkable for them to abandon their God and pledge devotion to this idol. So they plead with God. They plead with God and plead with God to give them a way out. And they wait to see what God will do. And they must have hoped and prayed that it would never come to this. Like after Daniel interpreted the dream, after Nebuchadnezzar saw the true power of God, and he proclaimed the God of Israel, the Lord of lords, the God of gods, the King of kings. They must have prayed for his total conversion if he could just give himself fully to God. But that didn't happen. Surely they prayed after this decree was made that Nebuchadnezzar would eventually, before this all happened, come to his senses. But he didn't. Maybe they prayed that the decree just wouldn't be enforced. But it was. Maybe they prayed that because of Daniel's influence, the Jewish people might be excused from it. But they weren't. Maybe they prayed that when the day came, nobody would notice that they failed to bow down, or that if people did notice, they wouldn't tell. But people noticed, and people told. And here's what I'm saying. You have to follow their journey through this whole thing, because not one of their prayers was answered all along the way. Not one. At every point, these men were bitterly disappointed. At every point, their death grew a little closer to reality. And now they are facing the worst case scenario, because every door of escape has been closed. They have two options, and only two options: bow to the idol or be thrown into the furnace. But despite all of their disappointment, despite the silence of God throughout all of their prayers, they testify once more to their faith in the one that they serve. Okay, verses 16 and 17 again. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But then look at verse 18. Look at verse 18. Because this is one of the greatest statements of devotion, I think, has ever been uttered. Verse 18, they begin with, but even if he does not. Don't be deceived. Our God can rescue us, Nebuchadnezzar. The God who drowned Pharaoh's army and felled Jericho's walls and dropped Goliath with a stone. He's lost none of his strength. Our God can rescue us still. But even if he does not, okay, even if he does not, we've already decided our response. We've made up our mind in the face of a worst case scenario. Even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Even if he does not. Okay, even if we have to march to our death singing hymns of praise to the only God we will ever serve or love, we will not bow. Guys, our God is able. He can still move, and he does. Our God is able to answer your most desperate prayers. He's able to grant you your deepest wish. But what I want to ask us to really think about this morning is, what about when he does not? Because here's the thing, right? We all have stuff that we want God to do. We do. And most of the time, as far as we can tell, it's good stuff. It's the kind of stuff that we're pretty sure God would want for us. Right now, I would bet that every one of you has stuff that you want. You have things that you want God to do for you. But at some point, we all have to ask, is my full devotion from one day to the next contingent on just getting from God what it is that I want? Like I think of Job, who refused to dishonor God despite intense suffering. That went on day after day after day with no relief and no explanation. And I think of Job, who uttered the most amazing words when he said, "Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him." Like who else? Where else could I turn? What else would I do? Like to whom else could I belong? Though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. Or I think of Esther, who, like these three men, decided one day to confront a tyrant king. She tried to save her people at the risk of her own death. And she says, "I will go to the king, even if it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So I'm here asking you this morning, will you give him your full devotion, even if he does not? Like maybe you're in a relationship right now, and you're really drawn, like highly attracted to this person. But this person is pressuring you to cross boundaries, maybe sexually, maybe other boundaries, that you know you shouldn't. Or they're involved in behavior that is opposed to your deepest values. And you can rationalize staying together out of fear. You know, kind of thinking to yourself, I may never find someone else that I'm so attracted to. I may never, and if I were to abandon this, I could end up alone. Listen, God is able. God is able to bring someone far better into your life. But this morning, I'm challenging you to ask yourself and to say to yourself, even if he does not, even if God does not bring somebody else into my life ever, even if it means facing fear and aloneness, I will not continue to dishonor God anymore. I will not bend the knee to this relationship and put God on the back burner. I will not. Or maybe it involves something with your career. Maybe you work where people cut corners. They do unethical things. And you're watching people cutting corners and getting ahead, and you're tempted to get ahead the same way. Now, God is able. I mean, God is able to get you a promotion. God is able to get you a new job, a better job. God is able to get you transferred to another department or whatever. But what I am asking you to wrestle with this morning is, what if he does not? Are you willing to do the right thing? Okay, the God-honoring thing, even if he doesn't get you the promotion? Even if he doesn't give you a better employment situation? Here's the thing. We all face pressure to bow the knee to something. And the hope is, if I compromise on this, then I can get what it is that I really want. And what we're saying in the back of our mind is, I don't really need God at all. You know, I can get this and I can take care of this on my own. And so I'm just asking you, where are you facing that kind of pressure these days? Where are the circumstances of your life asking you to bow down? And it's interesting because as Christ followers, we hear about God's faithfulness. We hear things like, okay, if you do the right thing, God will always honor you. And that's true, okay? That's true. But if we think that means, if you hold out and do the right thing, then God will always give you whatever it is that you want right now, that's way off. It's way off. There's an old story about an economist that tries to make a deal with God. And he sees the verse where it says, to God, 1,000 years is like a day. So he says to God, is that true? And God says back, yeah, that's true. Like to me, 1,000,000 years is like a second. And so the economist gets kind of excited about this idea. And he says, well then, to you, $1,000,000 must be like a penny. And God says, yeah, that's true. So the economist says, well then, God, could I have one of those pennies? And God says, no problem. Just wait here a second. We love to tell stories about how God is able. And he is. We talk about how he's faithful, and he will be. But what about when he says, just wait here a second? Here's the beautiful promise that we can cling to. We can cling to it. In the end, we will always, always, always be blessed. Our destiny, our final destiny, how the story ends is not in doubt. Your current circumstances will not determine your ultimate fate. Your life is in the hands of one who loves you completely. But in the end, you will always be blessed. But what do you do when God says, but wait here a second? That's when you find out what it is that you ultimately worship. You think about the model of the one that we serve. Okay, the one that we're trying to emulate. When he faced the furnace that day in the garden, he cried out, Father, let this cup pass from me. Father, please don't make me go through this. Father, save me from this suffering. Okay, you are able. Father, you are able. But then he resigned. Not my will, but yours be done, Father. I will drink this cup that you have given me to the last drop. And on the cross, the Son of God said to his Father, though he slays me, yet I will hope in him. And the reason is very simple. It's conveyed deeply in his final words. When he says, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Jesus knew who ultimately controlled his destiny. It wasn't Pilate. It wasn't the leaders of Israel that had plotted his death. It wasn't the crowd that had yelled, crucify. His destiny was in the hands of his loving Father. And friends, so is yours. Will you hope in him?